Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. My guest tonight is my friend, the famous LeRoy Sealy. You'll see later why I call him famous. He's involved in so many different activities teaching the Choctaw language. He's a native speaker and teacher of Choctaw, and I'd like to welcome you to the show, LeRoy.
Thank you.
Let's start, as we often do when we have a native speaker here, by having you teach us a greeting in Choctaw so we'll know how to greet someone if we meet them.
Okay. The simplest form would be halito, which is the English equivalent of hello. So halito.
And when you say that to someone, what do they say back?
In response, they would say halito chima chokma, which would be hello, how are you?
Very good. And what do you say back to that?
And then I say ama chokma hoki, which is I am doing fine.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, let's, for people that don't know you, there are a few people that don't know you yet. If you wouldn't mind giving us a little personal background, where you're from and how you got involved in all this Choctaw language work.
Okay. I was born in Tallahena, Oklahoma, at the what was then known as the Indian Health Service Hospital. Today it's known as the Choctaw Nation Indian Hospital. So that was where I was born. And my family were all Choctaw speakers, and so that was the first language that I learned to speak was Choctaw. And so that's how I came about with learning to speak Choctaw.
Now they're showing this, let's get this photograph back. They were showing this wonderful photograph you brought with you showing your family. Can you tell us who's in the picture?
The person in the center is my mother. Her name is Mary Alice Willis. She is a full-blood Mississippi Choctaw from Mississippi. Okay. And then I have 3 sisters in the photo who are Jaxie, Roxy, and Jolene. And then my brother who's on our right side, and his name is Bobby. And of course I'm on the left side, and of course the famous LeRoy.
That's right, get used to it.
So that's our family. My father deceased in late 1978, and so so there's just only the 5 of us children and my mother.
And you don't all of you get together that often anymore, you were telling me.
No, we don't. My brother lives in Florida, and then 2 of my sisters lives in Mississippi, and then 1 sister lives here in Oklahoma. So on special occasions do we come together and meet. So.
Well, you mentioned having relatives in Mississippi. There are 2 major Choctaw communities in this country, right? Oklahoma and Mississippi. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. The Choctaws in Mississippi are the Choctaws who are descendant from those who remained in Mississippi after the removal. And the Choctaws who are in Oklahoma are the descendants of those who made the removal. We have just recently learned that there is a 3rd group of Choctaws, and they recently received their federal recognition, and so they're known today as the Gina Band of Choctaw Indians of Louisiana. So, of course,
do all 3 groups speak Choctaw language, or at least some of the individuals in the 3 communities?
In Oklahoma, the statistics that was shown in the 1987 said that out of a population of 25,000 Choctaws, 12,000 spoke the language. Okay, so that looks like a big number, but when it seems like a lot, but when you break it down in percentages, it's very low, very low.
And what about the how do these speakers distribute themselves in the different age groups? Are they mostly the older people, as in so many tribes, or do you still have children learning Choctaw?
Before 19 86, when the languages began to be taught, only the elderly people of the tribe. And when we say elderly, we're looking at those members who are 60 to 65 years and above. Anyone below that does not speak the language. There may be members who know words and simple phrases, but to carry a complete conversation, only the elders.
Yeah. So even though you have a large number of speakers, it still is, wouldn't you still consider it an endangered language?
I would consider it, yes, an endangered language.
Before we go on, you mentioned being from Talihina. Maybe you could tell people that don't know any Choctaw whatsoever. That has kind of an interesting definition in Choctaw. What does that mean?
Okay. Talihina is comprised of two words, and they're both Choctaw words. Tali, which means rock or iron or any type of metal, and hina is the word for road. And how this town received the name is because of the different freights that would come through. There was the San Francisco, there was the Choctaw rail line, and then I believe Katy may have came through also. But this was a center of, in its day, a very big commerce. And so a lot of Choctaws would come and trade there. So that was a pretty good size town for its day. So that's how the town received its name.
Now, let me, before I ask you about the many classes you've been involved in teaching, I should have mentioned a couple of other things about you besides being a speaker of Choctaw and a teacher. You're also secretary of the Oklahoma Native Language Association and reporter of the Choctaw Language Teachers Association, which is a tribal post.
Right.
Now, let's see about your classes. If you could tell us briefly, then we'll take a look, take a peek into one of your most interesting classes in terms of the technology. Which different types of classes are you teaching these days?
I'm involved in teaching 6 different classes. 3 of the classes are here at the University of Oklahoma Norman campus, in which I teach beginning Choctaw 1, beginning Choctaw 2, and then the intermediate Choctaw. And then I'm teaching a telecommunications course for the Southwest Indian Polytechnic Institute, which is known as SIPI, at Albuquerque, New Mexico.
That's the interesting one that I mentioned, because you don't go to Albuquerque to teach it, do you?
No, I don't, and that's something that's different.
We're going to take a look at that in a minute, your telecommunicated course.
Right. The other course, the program that I teach, is a community-based Choctaw course, in which I have 2 classes. One is generally on Thursday evenings, and which is the second, what we call second phase class 2, and then I have a first phase, which is like the beginning 1 course here at OU. This is phase 1, in which they're the beginner Choctaws that's taking the course. And these are, both of these courses are taught there at the Choctaw Community Center in McAlester.
So you teach in McAlester and Norman and Albuquerque every week.
Right.
Although Albuquerque only electronically.
Right, Albuquerque.
Before we go further into that, maybe we could take a look at the first section of tape that we wanted to show, that shows, this was taped this Tuesday night, showing a little bit of your class that you were teaching to the Albuquerque students from the Norman campus.
Okay.
Now, this is not your usual classroom, of course. This is a 2-hour class, and we'll just see a few minutes. We don't see any students there in the classroom because they're all in Albuquerque. We'll see them in a moment on the monitor.
Something to be done to someone, which would be to be done to me, or to be done to you, to be done to us. I have some sentences here that we're going to look at. This shows how in this sentence, notice that this is the first time we have a real pronounced third person marker, which we've noted that this third person marker is im or in. When a third person is referred to, this marker must always appear even if the third person is named. In sentence 1, Hatakat Pilichi Huliso in Pilato. The man sent a letter to the director. Now notice that Hatakat is the man, in which this is our subject of this sentence. And then Pilichi is the director. Huliso is a letter, and then impilato. Impila means to him this letter is sent, and we have our past tense at the end. So pila is in the literal sense is to send, and by having the tok at the end, that changes it to sent. So then, and then notice that the third person marker is implied here to mean to send to him. So in pilatok. Hatakat piliji uliso in pilatok. Sentence 2. Sapukaniat isinipi pim atahleto. Again, my grandmother, who is the subject of this sentence, sapukniat. And then isinipi is the venison or the deer meat. And then pim atahle, prepare for us. And then the word atahle gives us the indication of prepare. And so with our past tense marker at the following, then it changes this word to prepared. So my grandmother prepared venison for us. Okay, any question? Now then, notice that sa is used when the word following begins with a consonant. The word psalm is used when the word following begins with a vowel. So the same holds true with your the words chim, hachim, pim, and im. These words will be used when the word following will begin with a vowel. Chin, hachin, pin, and in are used when the words following begins with a consonant. So that's the rule of usage of when these word prefixes would be used. The word atafle begins with a vowel, so then psalm is used. Okay, any question? Now then, let me give you this word, rabbit, chokfi, and give me the different forms of the possessive marker for chokfi.
Now, LeRoy, you told me that's not the classroom where you usually have your class. It just so happened they had to move you to a different class that night. But the general setup, that is how it works, that you have the monitors and the cameras and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I mentioned that there were no students in that room, but there were those two people, and some people may have known who they were, but if they don't, that was Marcia Haig, who's a linguist who has been involved in Choctaw teaching, and Henry Willis, another native speaker who's also been involved in teaching and writing about Choctaw language. Let's now look at some of the things that you brought to show us. If you could tell us what some of these things are.
Okay, starting over here to the picture is entitled Cooking Fry Bread, and this is some of the activities that you will see when we're at meetings, church gatherings, family gatherings. Choctaws have always cooked outside, and so this is the natural part of the scene of cooking. And now, sometimes I'll refer home as to Mississippi, even though that's my mother's original homeland. It's my ancestral homeland, but back home in Mississippi, you will notice that in this picture that the ladies that are cooking are wearing their traditional Choctaw clothing. And to this day in Mississippi, they still wear their clothing.
And by the way, this art, both of these two cards you're going to show us are by Norma Howard, who is Choctaw.
Right. Norma Howard is, she's a real good friend of mine, and she is a Choctaw artist. She's part or half Mississippi Choctaw and half Chickasaw. But she has been around the Choctaw side of her family, that she mostly knows more about the Choctaw lifestyle.
How about this other Norma Howard card over here? What's that one say?
This card here is entitled 16 House Dance, and back again in Mississippi, they have two forms of social dancing, in which one is the traditional social dancing, which was performed during harvest time. And then this in here is somewhat the more newer or modern traditional Choctaw house dance, and it kind of resembles like a square dance. Okay, but
just to look at it, it reminds me of the Virginia Reel a little. Different costumes, though,
right?
Different clothing.
In this picture, you'll notice that the dancers are wearing different clothing, different color clothing. That is, the art, the design overall is basically the same.
Very interesting. Okay. Those are both wonderful. What are these other two things that you brought?
This here is what we call the egg basket, and it's weaved from cane. And then this item here is what we call the Choctaw blowgun. And
what, may I ask, is that used for?
This here can be used for many different hunting purposes.
I see. And there's some kind of a dart that goes inside of there?
Right, yes.
Oh, very interesting. All right, now, before we start running out of time, I have another section of tape that I'd like to show. And this was the gathering just this afternoon at your house of this is your intermediate Choctaw class, right? The third level of your Choctaw classes at OU. And you had them over to talk about Choctaw recipes and have them sample some Choctaw food, right?
Right.
Let's take a look at that.
A listing of some of the recipes that talks about Choctaw food. There's a recipe for corn cob syrup making. I don't know if you've ever had that. Tanchi labona, which is hominy, corn, and pork meat cooked together. Okay, and that's what this middle dish is. This is the tanchi labona. We spoke about the different parts of the pig that is used. Now, when we cook this particular dish, we're using the neck bone. Okay, and it's real good after it's prepared together and cooked. So that's what this dish is. Now then, we have wild onions and eggs, and the wild onions you have to go out into the country to find, And right now is a good time to go pick wild onions because they're at a height that you can make this humongous meal from. And what you do is you boil the wild onions, and then you take some eggs and just like you're going to scramble it up, and you pour it into the cooked onions and let it cook for maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and then you're ready to serve it. And Choctaws loves this dish. I mean, this is one of their favorites. At the bottom you'll see fry bread. Fry bread really wasn't a Choctaw food, but it has become more so international or intertribal. So every tribe has fry bread, and it's prepared different ways. So this is one of the simpler forms to make fry bread. Grape dumplings. I don't know if you've ever heard of grape dumplings before, but Choctaws used to go out, and there used to be wild grapes that grew, and they would pick these grapes and they would make the dumplings and several other dishes from them. And that's what this back dish here is. This is grape dumplings. The next dish recipe is banana, which is shutbread. Now, this meal takes quite a lot to prepare, and so I didn't get to make this one, in which I wanted to make it, but you have to make the bread, then you have to take the corn shucks and wrap it up. Then you have to put it in some boiling water, and then that takes another process. So that step is a little longer to do. But here's the recipe for that particular dish. Now then, again, Choctaws we like salt pork meat, okay, and fried. And this is one of the other dish that you will find at every meal, basically, is salt pork meat. And then, of course, the pan-fried crawlways. I remember as a young child that we would eat this. My grandparents and cousins and everybody that went fishing would always wound up catching some bullfrogs, and so they would take the frogs and keep them, and they'd cook the frog legs. Now then, we have here in this pot Kobe, which is beans, red beans, okay, and it's just cooked as it would normally be cooked in your regular cooking. In this pot is what we call hashila. In some dialects, they'll call it ashila. So there's two ways of calling this. This is simply like corn mush, and you can put any meat in here for flavoring, and I put chicken in this one for flavoring. The older Choctaws, when they were sick or ill and they didn't feel good or anything, sometimes, when you and I are sick, all we want is soup, okay? Chicken noodle soup or something. Choctaws, this was what they wanted. For some reason, they could handle it when they were sick. So they would request for a sheila to be cooked. And so that's what this dish, and of course over here is our fried salt meat. And then we always like McAlester, which is cornbread. Okay? And then, of course, that serves for any meal that you would have. Now, if you'll notice that basically majority of our dish comes from corn. And corn was one of the items that was very sacred and reverent to the Choctaws. There's a story about a bird who flew over, and the Choctaws had prayed, that God would send them some kind of food staple, because there was a time where food was becoming scarce. And so this bird flew over and dropped a kernel of corn. So they found this corn, and they took the corn and they planted it. And at the end of the harvesting, well, then this stalk of corn came up. And so with that, they took the kernels from that stalk and reproduced it until now we have corn, and that's where we get our corn from. And so a lot of the dish that that the Choctaws have is centered around corn. But also for the meat purposes, then we will have pork, we'll have deer, fish, and of course now today most of us don't eat some of the other foods, but we used to have raccoon, skunk, possum, and these were some of the other foods that we had. Any questions? Seasoning.
So that comes a good part from the food. You're a good cook, Leroy. And of course, Leroy had to take a photograph of his students. But the real stars of the afternoon will be coming up in just a moment, and those are the Choctaw foods.
This is Hashila. This is Shokanipi Alwasha. This is Tanchi Labona. This is Panki Walakshi. This is Tubi. And this is Tanchi Palaska.
Well, Leroy, I'm so impressed at all the language activity with Choctaw language recently, and a lot of it done through the tribe, which is very admirable.
Right, and we have our new director, who is Alistine Thomas, and we hope that we can get a lot of material done and a lot more work accomplished.
Well, I wish you very good luck with all of that. I'm sure you'll do well. Right now we're out of time, so I'm going to have to say good night and see you next time on Wordpath.
Ana magwana kita wa pene madaone kita na hene yo hene ana magwana kita wa pene madaone kita na hene yo hene ana magwana kita wa pene madaone kita na hene yo hene ana magwana kita wa pene madaone kita